Well, this is a good segue to what I wanted to talk about, the grape culture here in Virginia. What would you like people to think of when I tell them I'm going to bring you some Virginia wine?
I hope they don't go, oh no, don't do that.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Real Estate, Wine, and More podcast. I'm your host, Howard Fletcher. I'm a real estate advisor with Engel & Volkers and Tysons, and I bring buyers and sellers of residential real estate together in the Washington metropolitan area, better known as the DMV. And in today's episode, I visit the winery at Bull Run. Now, if Bull Run sounds familiar to you, you probably remember it from your high school history class or from Ken Burns' fantastic documentary, The Civil War. Bull Run is actually a stream, and it crosses Fairfax, Loudoun, and Prince William counties in Virginia. And in the American Civil War, two major battles were fought at a site just north of the city of Manassas in Prince Frederick County. The winery at Bull Run is located adjacent to the historic stone bridge, and that bridge crosses that Bull Run stream at the eastern entrance of the Manassas National Battlefield Park. The original bridge was destroyed during the First Battle of Bull Run, and it's also called the First Battle of Manassas, on January 21st, 1861, the first major land battle in the Civil War. And some years later, a new bridge was built there, and it's very similar to the original design, and you can see it there today, and you can see it actually if you go to the winery. The winery lies on 225 acres that are right next to Manassas Battlefield Park. It's adjacent to the battlefield. And there, the remnants of an old house that burned down about 30 years ago, those remnants still partially stand. And that is where the winery is built. And that's where I sat down with the winemaker in their spacious barrel room to talk about history, Virginia, and wine. This is episode 7, the winery at Bull Run, talking grapes with a Georgia Bulldog. Okay, well, I am at the winery at Bull Run. It's about 25 miles southwest of D.C., I believe. It was about an hour drive on a normal day if you don't run into too much traffic. And it's a very historic spot. We're right next to the Manassas battlefield. This is the site of the first battle of the American Civil War, or what my fourth grade teacher used to like to call the war between the states. And I'm here with Ashton Lough, who is the winemaker here. Ashton, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you very much.
So what can you tell us about what you do here, about actually making the wine here? I know that's a lot. That's a big question.
That's a big question. That could take a while. But so we have a vineyard manager. We have 2 vineyards. We have one right around the winery, and then we have one down off of 211 in a little town called Amosville. So we have a really good vineyard manager, Wayne Mills. So I don't have to do too much regarding the growing of the actual fruit.
That's good.
And which is handy, so I can really focus on the winemaking. So, Wayne and I talk very closely, and when we decide to harvest the fruit, we'll load it up, we'll get it here at the winery, and that's really when my job starts.
How long have you been here as the winemaker?
I came to Virginia from the University of Georgia in July of 2012. Was hired by Chris Pearman at the Pearman Cellars, and then made the wine at Vent Hill, and then we got the contract to make the wine, for the winery at Bull Run. That was their initial year, I think. It was 2012.
So as long as you've been here, were the vines already in place, or do you have the input on what is grown here?
Right around the winery, the soil is not spectacular, for growing fruit, so we chose Norton right around the winery. Norton is a native kind of hybrid to the East Coast. Grows a lot in Missouri also, and It was originally created by Dr. Norton in Richmond, I think in the early 1900s.
What other grapes do you or wines do you produce here?
We produce Viognier, Chardonnay. We produce a white blend called Delaney, named after the owner's oldest daughter. Sometimes, depending on the year, we'll have a single varietal Traminette, a couple of dessert wines, port, make a Chamberson Rosé, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Petit Verdot, and usually a blend of those Bordeaux grapes too.
Chamberson is a grape that I have run into here and there, sometimes quite often, and then other times not as often, but in the Mid-Atlantic, certainly. Do you do anything, and I've noticed a wide range, I would say, in the taste of it or the quality of the wine that's being produced, or the style of wine, let me say, being produced. How do you like to use Chamberson, or what do you do with it?
So I like Chamberson. It's a larger berry, produces a lot of juice. It's got good color. It grows, well in Virginia. Crops pretty heavy. But I prefer to use Chamberson as either a rosé or a port. I've had and I've made some table wines from Chamberson, and I just didn't think it makes as good a table wine as it does, other styles. And so I generally don't, use it for a table wine.
So someone coming to the Winery at Bull Run for the wine specifically, I know you get a lot of people here because of the history of the area. My first time coming here was not actually when I met you. It was I was on a board of a nonprofit that you have a lot of events here, and they had a fashion show down, I guess, underneath the tasting room.
Right.
And I really loved it. The place is, the tasting room is very nice. We're here in the barrel room. This is also a nice area. But what's neat about this place is that you have all these little Civil War artifacts around, like the rifles and things that are in the tasting room, so you can get a little bit of history while you're getting a little drunk.
Well, the owner here is a Civil War buff, and due to our location, there were a lot. We have murals around that show different areas of the battlefield, and the first shot of the Civil War was fired within eye shot from here. So it's a historical property, and so the owner embraces that. And, the whole winery is kind of themed to that kind of era, older kind of architecture and barn look and that sort of thing.
Sure. Why, as the winemaker, what would you say to somebody who's coming down here specifically for the wine? What are you very good at making? What do you like to highlight?
I make an equal share of both. Statistically, whites sell around, I think, 60% of the market, and 55%. Reds, 40 to 45. So we make a few more whites than we do reds, and we have a rosé. The South, generally speaking, leans a little sweeter than other areas of the country. So we do make a couple of off dry, the term for having a little bit of residual sugar. Wines, we have a rosé, our Cuvée Blanc, Delaney. It's also slightly off dry, but I make a wide variety. I make everything from dry, crisp white wines to heavy, robust ports and everything in the middle. So when I was working at multiple wineries, making wine for multiple wineries, I got very good at blending and using different vineyards of fruit to make 3 or 4 different Cab Francs, maybe 6 or 7 different Chardonnays. And make them all taste different. Now, you might not know which one came from which winery, but you could taste distinctive differences in each one. So I think I'm pretty good at that. And you making a large variety of wines that are very drinkable.
Speaking of using grapes from different areas or different places, I know a lot of wineries, including this one, gets fruit from in Virginia and Maryland and some of the surrounding area. But when you go outside of, say, the Mid-Atlantic, what grapes do you usually have to buy outside this area? And what grapes would you choose to if you just had an unlimited budget and it really wouldn't make a difference, where would you like to go for your fruit?
Well, Virginia's always my first choice. I never buy anything from any other state on the East Coast other than Virginia.
Okay.
Now, if the weather of the year forces me, I mean, it's based on math and economics.
Sure.
If I have to make 15,000 cases for the winery at Bull Run to survive, and I only have 13,500 cases worth of fruit in Virginia, then I have to make that up somewhere.
Right.
I prefer Washington State fruit.
Okay.
Anything I have to get from the West Coast, which I try to limit as best I can, it would usually come from Washington.
But why is that?
I like the quality of their fruit. I think and nothing against California or Oregon. I mean, they make beautiful wines, obviously, but the flavor profile of the Washington fruit is closer to the Virginia profile, your flavor profile, and I happen to like that a little bit better. Their climate's not quite as hot, so you don't get that really huge sugar level. The grapes don't get kind of raisined as much. There's a lot of factors go in, but the wine style I prefer to drink is a little lower alcohol, a little more complex, a little more interesting. And when you get really, really hot, dry climates, it kind of takes a little bit of that away from the fruit itself. You get a really high sugar and not as much complexity.
So where did you learn your craft? You said you went to the University of Georgia. Are you from Georgia?
No, I'm actually from Southern Virginia, but I went to Virginia Military Institute initially, and then did a lot of different things, and then in 2008 we decided to go back to school with aspirations of being a oral maxillofacial surgeon.
Wow.
Like my cousin is, and we worked with him for a little bit, and then got back into school, wanted to go to medical school, and found biochemistry. And I was, poor college student, so so I started, as any true biochemist would, making my own beer and wine at my house.
Right.
And found that I really enjoyed that, and so I continued to pursue that while in school, and I had a multi-million-dollar lab I was working in doing research, so I was able to take what I had made through the lab, run it through all my mass specs and stuff, and kind of really check it out, see where it was, bring other wines in, test them, and just found a love for it, and had to continue working at the university, or had to decide to do something else, and went on winejobs.com and found an ad for a winery in Virginia.
Yeah.
And came up in July of 2012.
It's funny, in doing these podcasts with different people, wineries, owners, winemakers mostly, it seems like they come into the craft of winemaking two ways, mostly. Some because it's a family business and they learned it from a father or uncle or something like that. But in the DC area, overwhelmingly, it seems to be either they're chemical engineers or they come from the medical field in which they got involved in chemistry like yourself.
Right.
It's some there, and it makes sense, obviously, because the whole process is a chemical process. But I just found that very interesting because before going into this, I always had this romantic thought of, the family winery or, I learned this from my dad, or even if they weren't in the winemaking business, you kind of learned it some other way. But it's very interesting that most people seem to come to it nowadays, or at least in this area, from that angle.
Yeah, well, I mean, the United States really is not a wine culture per se, we haven't lived here that long, Europe is a wine culture. They've had wine in their, lifestyle for, thousands and thousands of years, as has, all around, the Mediterranean and the Fertile Crescent, all through those areas. So, I mean, those are wine cultures. So, that's that's where you get the tradition of families and wineries and all that kind of stuff. I mean, we're in the wine world pretty new on the block as far as the age of the industry, and Virginia in particular with regards relative to the West Coast. It's been going on there pretty well since the 1800s, even earlier than that. Thomas Jefferson tried it here, but they didn't have the ability to combat the native fungus and the humidity issues and the insect issues and that kind of thing. So everything he tried to grow, it failed because it just couldn't handle the environment. Because we're in a warm, wet climate, and that's great for all things that like to destroy grapes. And so until you develop the technology to defend against that, which we now have, around the 70s, I think, early to mid 70s, spray technology, and on the West Coast they don't have a lot of the problems either. That's why theirs began much earlier than ours.
Right.
It's very dry. They don't have a lot of bug pressure or disease pressure out there, and so which is great for grapes. It's very similar, to the Mediterranean kind of climate, southern Italy, that sort of thing.
Well, this is a good segue to what I wanted to talk about, the grape culture here in Virginia. As you mentioned, California in the late 60s, early 70s had developed one. So that's where you get the name California Cab and other things. They when you think about California, you think of Sonoma, Napa, even Oregon with Pinot Noir and other things. You have an image, you have a thought of what they're producing. What do you think that's going to, or what's the shape Virginia has right now, and where do you think it's going to go? And what would you like people to think of when I tell them I'm going to bring you some Virginia wine?
I hope they don't go, oh no, don't do that.
Yeah.
Due to our climate, we are still, finding our way which grapes to choose that suits best here. Climatically, we kind of sit in the middle of France.
Right.
Depending on the year. Sometimes in a hot, dry year, our fruit's a little more West Coast in style, cooler, dry, a little more French in style, warm and wet, which we have a lot of. It's a unique kind of Virginia style of fruit. So our climate, we have a lot of vintage, variation, from year to year. So, you picking a certain group of fruit, grape plants, it's hard to determine what actually is the perfect types of grapes to grow in Virginia. So that's why we pick off a little bit from France. So we've got some Bordeaux varietals that grow here. We've got Chardonnay that grows here. We've got Petit Manseng, maybe Gros Manseng that grows here. It's from the south in the mountains. And then we've got Viognier. But the other ones we can't grow. We can't really grow Pinot Noir very well. We can't grow Syrah, Grenache very well. It's just not hot enough. The Bordeaux grapes do okay, do well in certain years, okay in others. I know people are trying some Italian varietals from the interior of Italy, maybe some Nebbiolo, I think Albarino, Barboursville makes a really nice Albarino. Vermentino, I think they also make very well. So, people are trying a lot of different things, and there's a lot of good wine coming out of Virginia. But as far as picking a spot and saying, Virginia does great, Cab Sauv or something like that, I don't know that we've really determined that. We grow a really good Cab Franc and Viognier, and I think that's probably starting to be a blip on the radar, but. We're still pretty small. A lot of the wineries are very small, so we don't distribute, and that's why you don't see
absolutely
a lot of wine out in the marketplace from Virginia.
Yeah, and it's tough. I've had that conversation too with a lot of producers, and I don't know if in the near future, it just by the economies of scale, by number, if you're ever going to be able to do that anytime soon, because there are producers that produce more wine, single producers in California that produce more wine than the entire state of Virginia.
Right.
But, I've told this story too on this podcast. In the 80s, when I was at Georgia Tech, and you were at Georgia.
I won't hold that against you.
I'd come back home, and I remember in the Washington Post there was a story about Virginia wine, and there were some tours. This was the late 80s now. There were some tours that were happening, and I think they had a little map of places you could go if you want to go. And I asked, and I was surprised to see it. I had no clue that they were even making wine down there. And the people I knew who had gone on some of those tours came back with terrible reviews. Oh, the wine's terrible. It's this type of thing. And I think it probably wasn't the best at that time. However, I think that you're right in that, or I'm in agreement with you, and a lot of other people are too. That growers are finding what grows best here, and certainly winemakers. They're some of the best winemakers in the States, I think, in this area now. Yep. And so while people are learning, we're still learning where we're going. I'm hoping that at least the reputation will precede it that the wine is better. Right. And actually some of it is as good as anything you're going to get anywhere else. I just think that the public needs to, and that's one of the things I tried to achieve with this podcast. I just hope that the public will start to taste and try it more.
Right.
And so hopefully that they will spread that reputation, because I don't know if distributing it is going to be possible or profitable for anybody really involved. I think this might be a location wine for quite a while.
Right. Well, the issue with distribution is you got to make a lot of it at an economic cost that makes sense both for the winery and the distributor. And so the fruit in Virginia, because of the labor involved, is fairly pricey. There's not a lot of mechanization in the vineyard. We do have a lot of slope, and we have a lot of rain, and that can be troublesome when harvesting fruit. And there's just a lot of hand labor that's involved in making Virginia wine, and so it's you can't run a picker through the vineyard in a lot of places and harvest the fruit and that you can in other locations. So the economies of scale for most of the wineries in Virginia just don't line up. Now there are some that are large enough and they've got enough deep pockets to be able to do a fair amount of distribution, but that's not the norm in Virginia. Our economic models based on people coming to the winery and enjoying the property and hanging out and having a couple bottles of wine or taking a few with them or whatever. So I don't know that we'll ever be the big distributor state. I mean, you can put 6 Virginias in California. So,
right.
I mean, you're just from a land size, we're not gonna be able to do anything like that.
Yeah, well, but it can certainly help the tourist economy.
I mean, we're on the top 10 destination list for wine tourism.
Yeah, and that's rightfully so.
And so, I mean, we're kind of in a sweet spot on the East Coast. If you go too much, further north, you struggle to grow reds. New York does beautiful whites, but they routinely you struggle with the red fruit. If you go too far south, your disease pressure gets really, really high, and your bug pressure, so I mean we're kind of in the little sweet zone on the East Coast as to where the best fruit potentially could be grown.
This I know last year there was a lot of rain. I think double the amount of rain, if not more than double.
Our vineyard got 100 inches.
Yeah, and what would you prefer? What's your sweet spot, so to speak?
Less than 100 inches.
I mean,
half of that.
Okay.
The drier the better.
Right.
Grapes thrive when they struggle a little bit, or the fruit's better when the vine struggles a little bit, and dry is always better than wet.
Yeah.
Now we don't have to irrigate, which is handy. Yeah. But when you get inundated with water like we did last year, it's detrimental to the fruit after a certain point. I mean I mean, grapes, honestly, grapevines are kind of glorified weeds. They grow everywhere. So they can, suffer through a certain amount of rain, but after a point,
Now, what about this rain we've had? We're recording this. This is the first, the 10th of March? No,
What,
it's
today?
past that. Yeah, 12th. We're past that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
today is the 12th.
12th of March. And it's been a wet beginning of this year, but you haven't had bud break.
Right, yeah.
So does that matter?
Not really. Not at this point. Now, the ground's still saturated from, last year, so it needs to dry out at some point.
Okay.
Because that just it creates even more disease.
Right.
When you don't get it ever drying out if it continues to stay wet.
Right. Could you need it to develop more sugar, right? If it's drier in the grape.
Well, it's a little more complex than that. But the fruit doesn't. The grapes vines themselves don't like sitting in water. It's like any other plant. Eventually it drowns. And they're worried more about survival, not fruit production, and so they kind of leave off producing grapes, and the grapes they do produce are not very good quality. You need the dryness not necessarily for the sugar, but for the health of the plant.
Okay.
And you need sunshine. Wine is sunshine, basically.
Okay. Well, that's what I'm hoping for this year because I'm a red drinker.
Right.
And I know last year was hard on the red crop so I don't know. 2018 might not be one of the strongest vintage years for reds.
I can comfortably say that it will not be a strong red year for Virginia.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of rosé is what I've been hearing.
Now the whites, if you got them early enough, and usually the whites we didn't really have many issues with, other than they didn't reach their full sugar potential. They still make good wines.
Well, one more thing before I wrap up, but the other day, last week, last Friday, I believe, you were mentioning that you had you did a little seminar on sparkling wine.
I did.
Here, which do you guys make a sparkling wine?
We do not. We have it contracted from the West Coast to make. We just can't grow the fruit that we feel makes the best sparkling wine here, and we don't have the setup. It takes a little different equipment set up to be able to do that. We're maturing in our production facility still, so we don't make that in house right now.
What grapes would you need that you couldn't?
Pinot Noir. I really like Pinot Meunier. Now we do get Chardonnay, but right now the Chardonnay in our vineyard only supports enough to produce the wine, that's our traditional, Chardonnay. So we would need to increase our crop in order to make a Blanc de Blanc, type Chardonnay. But again, and I'd love to do that because I love to make bubbly. I do a little bit, for my own consumption from raspberries or blueberries, which also make beautiful bubbly. But a couple of cases, it's quite good. But we just don't have the setup right now to be able to do that.
Okay.
And I would love to in the future, though. So I'm kind of pushing them a little bit to try to do that. Plant some more Chardonnay, and we'll make a really nice Blanc de Blanc.
All right. Well, what would you leave our audience with as far as why should they come down to visit the winery at Bull Run?
Well, you should come to Bull Run in particular because we have a beautiful, facility. We have a lot of events going on all the time. We'll have bands, we have festivals. It's a lot of fun. We also have extended hours. So if you, wanted to, quiet, relaxing drink in the evening, you could, come here on the weekends for that. During the week, it's a little slower than it is on the weekends. So,
but you are open every day.
Open every day.
Yeah.
Unless it snows, we had a couple of snow days this year. But yeah, it's a really fun place to come. The wines are solid, I would say continue to, if you've had a bad experience in Virginia wine overall, continue to find other wineries, and just do research, and because I mean, most of them are really, really nice places to go, and you can always find something you can enjoy to drink.
Okay. All right. Ashton Lough, I appreciate the time. And
absolutely,
I will be back when it's much warmer and sunnier in the spring and summer. Like I said, the event that I went to before was excellent. It really was.
Good. Fantastic.
So appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You betcha. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that's another show in the books, and that's another reason why I love the DMV. I would like to thank Ashton Lough for being on the show and allowing me to interview him in the winery. If you have an interest in learning more about the winery at Bull Run, the wines they produce, and some of the history of Bull Run, their website is in the show notes. And if you're looking for a great and educational weekend day trip from DC, I highly recommend visiting the winery at Bull Run. Listen, I would love to hear from you. If you want to contact me about real estate in DC, Maryland, and Virginia, or the subject matter of this podcast, please email me at howard.fletcher@evusa.com, or just Google Howard Fletcher Podcast or Howard Fletcher Real Estate, or even Real Estate and Wine Podcast, and I guarantee you're going to find me on the first page. Something that you can do that would help me out a whole lot, especially if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or on iTunes, is please rate this episode and also subscribe. Go there and do it right now. And if you like the show, let your friends know about it and ask them to give me a listen too. I would very much appreciate it. I want to grow this podcast as much as possible. Many of you know I want to take over the world. The Real Estate Wine and More podcast is a production of the Fletcher Group, made in association with Engel & Folkers, Tysons, and Lansdowne. Music for this episode was supplied by Cadillac Grip. If you're ever in the Boulder or Denver, Colorado areas, please go see Cadillac Grip play. Because if you ain't hip to the grip, you just ain't hip. The Real Estate Wine and More podcast was written, recorded, engineered, produced, and screwed up by me. I'm Howard Fletcher, your friendly neighborhood real estate advisor with Engel & Folkers. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.